Okay, hello again, y'all. It's good to see you, or for you to see me. I'm going to start on chapter 7 now. Unfortunately, I did need to leave Frisco and come home, so I don't have the projector behind me, but I do have slide notes that you can see here. I'm going to lift up each time I switch to a different slide so you can follow along with me. You likely will not be getting through this entire lecture today, but I am going to be posting lectures now just all the time. I'm going to elect someone to make sure that my computer is being used during class to videotape, and they will just constantly be going up to Canvas. This can be for students who miss class, but also for students who maybe are more auditory learners and could use listening to me again, and that could potentially be helpful for their studying. So hopefully this will be a valuable tool and not just for the days that I miss, and it's not like I'm planning on missing again. So anyway, thanks to Gabriel, you can all still be in class and get credit and extra credit. Hopefully chapter 6 and chapter 7 handouts went well, and you'll be seeing those extra credits soon in your gradebook. Alrighty, so starting on chapter 7, we're talking about mood disorders and suicide. As always, starting out with these learning objectives here that are listed. And we also have 3 slides of that. So moving on to our first slide, mood disorders and overview. Today, really, we're going to be talking about depression. The defining feature of a mood disorder is extreme sense of emotion affectivity. Mood disorders were formerly known actually as affective disorders. Maybe you can think of like affect versus effect. Affect is talking about someone's emotional experience or reaction. And really the difficulties that people are experiencing with their emotions are not always that their emotions are quite low or sad is the typical word, but can also be that they have flat affect, that they are not able to experience emotion as they would like to. A lot of people who experience mood disorders endorse feelings that they feel that they can't feel happiness, but they also aren't really feeling sad. They almost wish that they could feel sad so that they could feel something. There are obviously a lot of co-occurring disorders with mood disorders. Depression is often the catch-all that we just commonly say for people who are coming into offices such as mine. So moving on to the second slide, 2 key moods is on the top. So what we can think of is that there's depression and then there's mania. So depression would be that low affect, low mood, those feelings of sadness, the feelings of being blue, maybe dejection, maybe feeling a lot of loneliness. Oftentimes people note that they feel a lack of motivation or they feel really sad or just really tired all the time. But then there's on the flip side, which is mania. And that's not to say that these people are feeling happy. That's probably not what they're feeling. A lot of time it can bring on a lot of tension for people. But it's like these unrealistic feelings of excitement that are verging on euphoric, but a lot of times also it can be kind of scary for people, and definitely scary for the people around them who are feeling these like extreme emotions that can give them a lot of energy, can make them like talk really fast, can make them want to buy a lot of things that they don't need, can make them do a lot of really risky behaviors. And what's kind of crazy is that you can have actually a mixed episode, and that's really confusing for people if you're thinking of mania as happiness. So don't think of mania as happiness. Think of it as a extreme sense of emotionality. That's a better way of thinking about it. So you can have what's called a mixed state. A mixed episode, which is when you are experiencing both states of both depression, so you're feeling that blueness, feeling that sadness, that dejection, but then also feeling that hyperarousal. So that can be pretty confusing time for the people who are going through it. Also a pretty difficult diagnosis to give, because a lot of times it looks very mixed and it's hard to pick up on those depression symptomatology when someone is going through a manic episode. So moving on to the third slide, it says on the top, types of mood disorders: unipolar depressive disorders and bipolar depressive disorders. So unipolar depressive disorders are really only experiencing depressive episodes. They are not going to be moving into the manic states that you could be seeing with bipolar. The most common form of mood disorders are unipolar depressive disorders. As in, if you are thinking of two poles, as in one pole is in depression and one pole is in mania, they are staying on the depressive pole, so one pole, unipole. And what we see is that a person who is experiencing this unipolar depressive disorder, they're going to be feeling blue more often than not. They are going to have a loss of interest in what they typically enjoyed, difficulty experiencing lighter emotions, happier emotions, and it's what you would think of as someone who is depressed. And then bipolar depressive disorders are much more complicated and are harder to detect, because you are going to start seeing some of those waves, is what we commonly think of when we think of bipolar, that you're switching between the two poles. So now we're talking about depression and manic disorders again. So you're going to have the two poles that someone's going to be switching between. And with this, you could have a manic depressive episode, or you can switch between the two, where you experience depression and when you experience mania. And with that like manic episode, again, it's that markedly elevated experience of emotionality that can be very irritable for the person. They can maybe even experience violence or want to experience a lot of aggression. They can put themselves in places that are very risky. And then on top of all that, there's what's called a hypomanic episode, which is a milder form in which a person experiences abnormal, elevated, expansive, or irritable mood for at least 4 days. But what we see as far as the manic episodes that you are going to be potentially modulating between for unipolar versus bipolar, you're going to be someone who is experiencing a manic episode for much longer, potentially, than 4 days. You could even be experiencing a manic episode for 2-3 months. I'm pretty sure off the top of my head, and maybe it's on a future slide. Nope, it's not. That you need to be hitting about 2 to 3 weeks to be having a manic episode. So it is something that people can modulate between more quickly, but traditional bipolar, what we're just talking about right now as far as bipolar depressive disorders, you are going to be experiencing bipolar mania a little bit longer than 4 days. If it's 4 days or less, it would be a hypomanic episode. What we also have on the next slide is the prevalence of mood disorders. What we see here is that, again, women are twice as likely to experience a mood disorder than men. Among school children, boys are equally actually as likely to be experiencing depression, and even potentially on the situation that they're in and the environment that they're in, they can be sometimes more likely to be detected for depression than girls. And that's because boys have a tendency to be a little more hyperactive, a little more engaged in class, and teachers are more easily able to notice when they have a dip in their mood. For girls who maybe are already kind of sitting still more often, more quiet, reserved, it's going to be harder to detect. But we do see later in life, women are more likely to experience some mood disorders. We also do see that in the African American population and the Black population, mood disorders occur less frequently. We don't exactly know why. Maybe you can have some postulates about that, potentially the connection to faith and religiosity and community that is prevalent in the Black community. But you can also see that there's obviously so many sociocultural, geopolitical issues that are also plaguing the Black community. So I don't know about that, but we can just have some hypotheses about why that would be. We do also see that European white Americans are more likely to experience depressive episodes. And then even more so than European white Americans are people from Native American tribes or currently living on reservations. This we are able to connect that the likelihood is that they have such a lack of resources and that there is a great number of abusive alcohol, drugs, gambling is a huge problem, and that has all been linked to comorbidities with depression and mood disorders. So, next slide. What do we have? Demographic differences in the United States. So again, noting just here, Native American individuals have much higher rates of depression. Black individuals have lower rates. What we do know also is that individuals who have lower socioeconomic status are also more susceptible to mood disorders. And what else do we have here? Mood disorders are common in artists. I guess the stereotype of the starving, sad, moody artist is true in the research. Okay. On this next slide, you have here this figure. It is hard to see, so I will just try to list it out for you. Moving from left to right, you see the United States, Ukraine, France, New Zealand, Netherlands, Colombia, and so on. It's a number of different countries that are listed with a bar chart, and then on the side you see prevalence percentage. So United States is in the lead, unfortunately, I guess, with the highest prevalence of mood disorders occurring to the WHO, the World Mental Health Survey Initiative, World Health Organization. So just it's kind of interesting to see Nigeria has incredibly low rates of prevalence. Pretty interesting. So does this graph surprise you? Definitely something you can think about on your own as far as why this would be, what types of communities and supports. What we do know a lot about is that so much of what mood disorders has connections with is community and connection and feeling like you are making a difference and that you have purpose. So I think that has a lot to do with it, that there's so much pressure to succeed and drive and be on your own in the United States that maybe doesn't exist as much in other countries, despite how much privilege we have here. Okay. Bam. All right, so here on this slide, if I was there, we would watch a video. But I'm going to post these slides for you so you can see and you can watch the video on your own. It should be helpful for you, and the link is right here. And you have unipolar depressive disorders, and what we are going to talk about now. And with that, the first one that we commonly call depression is major depressive disorder. And when you watch the video, you'll get a good picture about what it really looks like, but I'm going to talk about it now, so hopefully you'll still get a good picture of what that looks like. So with that, we have our list of criteria according to DSM. We have major depressive disorder, depressive episode, and this would be without having manic, hypomanic, or mixed episode. So for you to meet criteria for MDD, you can't be having any mania symptoms. Relapse and recurrence is highly likely and predicted. And we are asking questions of when did you start experiencing depression and how many times have you been experiencing these types of feelings of depression. What we also know is that relapse refers to the return of symptoms. I should probably tell you what relapse means. It means that return of symptoms that you have experienced maybe depression before and now they're back. And then for a major depressive episode, we actually want to see the relapse time being actually quite short and really quite close, in that maybe the depression hasn't like fully run its course, and that you can be experiencing some depression emotionality and have like a slight bump in your mood where you feel a little bit better, and then you kind of have that drop back again. Not to say that you're getting even close to that other pole of mania, but just, maybe have a slight bump, a better day, a better week, and then it kind of goes back down. The probability of recurrence of you experiencing depression overall does increase with the likelihood. The likelihood increases, I should say, with how many times you've experienced depression in the past. What's often important to note is that during late adolescence to middle adulthood, we are seeing the highest rates of depressionality and the experience of depression symptoms. But some people, even experience it in very early childhood and late into it, elderly times, late adulthood, I guess I'll say. Here we have this just chart, and I'll read it out for you and explain a little bit. So there's what's called specifiers, and this is just a way that we can add on more information to an existing diagnosis. So let's say someone meets criteria for major depressive disorder. We can add on what's called a specifier. So the first example on this chart would be with melancholic features. All of the specifiers are always going to start with a with. So it's going to be with manic episode, not for major depressive disorder, but with catatonic features, with seasonal pattern. And there's all these different ways that you can just give more information. So really, like what I've said before, when you are giving a diagnosis, it's for other professionals to be able to have information about this person, what their symptomatology makeup looks like, and how they can all discuss with each other how to best treat this person. And for you, potentially as a clinician, to know what is the best route to treat this person. So when you have specifiers, it just gives you more information about what they actually look like, what's actually going on for them. So just for example, you have melancholic features, which could be about 3 of the following: early morning awakening, depression worse in the morning, marked psychomotor agitation or retardation, so you're moving a little bit slower, loss of appetite, a number of different things. Another really interesting one is potentially catatonic features, which would be a range of psychomotor, so being able to move around, control your body in the way that you want to. That their motoric immobility would be extensive, so they are not able. You could even see someone who's extremely catatonic, of course, not even be able to move their hands. You could move their hand and it would stay there. If you did this, they wouldn't be able to move it back. That would obviously be very extreme, but you can have some catatonic features even when you're so depressed that you're not able to move your body the way that you would be wanting to or would be motivated to. So here you have some possible specifiers for MDD. Moving on to persistent depressive disorder, PDD. P as in Paul. This is also known as dysthymia or dysthymic disorder. It's often, I think, actually what people most of the time think of as depression, because it's for people who experience depression for a really long time. So at least 2 years, they have been feeling down, blue, upset, unmotivated, sad, low, flat in affect for quite some time. That's why it's so important for you to be asking how long people have been experiencing this, these types of symptomatology, because this really is the marker between MDD, which we just talked about, and PDD, which is what we're talking about right now. I know you all probably have questions, so I do hope that you are writing them down and you can ask me them either over Canvas, over email, or just turn them in to Damien. So that was that. All right, back to PDD. So where were we? What's also important to note is that, again, you can experience some intermittent heightened mood. But again, it is kind of brief. It's going to be fleeting. It's going to be maybe some minor relief. And then unfortunately, what happens sometimes is that when people experience this minor relief, they actually feel worse afterwards because they remember what it felt like to feel a little bit better. And then they're like, oh shit, I'm still not there. So people feel sometimes worse. Lifetime prevalence ranges between 2.5% to about 2.6%. And the average duration is actually 4 to 5 years. So it's a very significant amount of time that people are experiencing this level of depression. Double depression is possible where persistent depressive disorder and MDD occur in the same person at the same time, meeting criteria for both, which is quite interesting in that it is possible that someone could be experiencing depressive levels for, like 4 to 5 years, like I was just mentioning, and then they can have a more extreme depressive episode where they're feeling even lower that like modulates between like low and even lower, and then they can meet criteria for MDD. What's also important is that they are often less able still to experience more positive moods. So you can see like some mood differentials just within their lower mood levels. That like sometimes there's, a deeper depression and then they can have a slightly less deep depression, which can have a feeling of relief for them, but not reach, normal levels of mood of just being euthymic, of just normal, every day, not too happy, not too sad. So they could modulate within there. Yeah. And that is also one of the most important characteristics when thinking about PDD, is that they do hit normal levels of mood. Like they could hit within that like euthymic range of like that just average normal emotionality range within that that depressed time, with MDD, if you would. So, next slide. As far as possible triggers for different types of depression, you could have bereavement triggered depression, and you can have postpartum depression. Not to say that either of these are good, but it is helpful with treatment when you have a very clear cause. Specifically with postpartum depression, we are able to really treat that one really, really well. Something to remember if you ever get pregnant or know someone who's pregnant and experiencing some depressive-like symptoms after they have given birth, because it is so, so, so connected to women's hormone levels and the amount of serotonin that they are experiencing in their bodies. So pretty much we give them some antidepressants and they feel a lot better most of the time pretty soon. But also with postpartum depression or with bereavement trigger depression, whenever you're going to a therapist to talk about what's going on, knowing where your depressive symptomatology is coming from, what's making you sad, what's making you low, is really going to be so much better than not knowing, not having a reason, feeling like you don't have a right to be sad. So it is just important to have as an addition to the way we understand depressive disorders, because it is really normal to feel sad and to feel a sense of loss, feel a sense of grief after someone close to you has passed away, or feel a sense of loss, feel a sense of grief after becoming a mother. Okay, PMS in the DSM. We are on, it says slide 16, just be up to date. Okay, so premenstrual dysphoric disorder has been added to the depressive disorders category. This is extremely controversial, and a lot of feminists, including myself, to be honest, thinks that this is maybe not so fair, and shouldn't have been added to the DSM, because there is just so much stigma around PMS and mood swings and whether or not we can trust women who are experiencing PMS or potentially about to be on their period or on their period. And this does kind of give it some clout, I would say. So there's that. And then there's also just this idea of like needing to have a diagnosis for reimbursement for insurance, and that it could be potentially linked. But there is a question of like, is this really a psychological problem, or is this maybe a gynecological problem that is happening with their hormonal levels when the body is experiencing menstruation or about to experience menstruation? So we do have, how can we resolve these controversies? Gee, I wish I knew. If you have any ideas, take it up with the American Psychiatric Association or the American Gynecological Association. I wish I knew. But something interesting to think about and something important to note. Causal factors, the good stuff. So like we just mentioned for, what did I just talk about? We were just talking about loss, bereavement, triggered depression, and postpartum depression. Those obviously we have pretty significant causal factors. We know that those are psychosocial causal factors, but of course there can also be biological factors, like with potentially PMS or with postpartum depression. There's obviously a huge biological connection. So we're going to go both farther into both of these. And again, as you'll see, this one does have a video, so you will have these notes eventually. I'll put them up soon, and you can watch both of these videos under. Okay. So, looking at the biological causal factors, we have that the genetic influences, and that this is highly genetically and heritably connected to people's experiences. Family studies and twin studies suggest a moderate genetic component, and that we have identified that there is a serotonin transporter gene, that when potentially there's any type of abnormality with that, people can have a higher likelihood of experiencing depression. What we also know is that there can be altered neurotransmitter activity within individuals' brains when they are experiencing major depression. We also know that dopamine dysfunction, like dopamine makes you happy, right? Oh wait, I think that's actually something else. I was thinking Legally Blonde, besides the point. But anyway, dopamine is usually quite low for people with depression. Also hormones, like I talked about, highly likely that when you have fluctuations in your hormone levels, that you'll also be experiencing depressive symptoms. Sorry. Excuse me. No one's here to say bless you. Okay. And what we also have is that cortisol obviously can play a role. We've talked a lot about that as far as stress, and when people are feeling anxious, that their body is rushed with cortisol. Well, we also know that there is a connection between cortisol and depressive feelings as well. And even more so, there's also people who experience low thyroid levels. That can be problematic. And for people who have maybe some brain abnormalities, with whether that's in their prefrontal cortex, like front part of their brains, that can be leading to depression as well as a causal factor. What we also know is that when people don't get very good sleep, that maybe their circadian rhythms are off, or that they can't get into a good REM sleep, like that really good rejuvenating deep sleep, people also are more likely to experience depression. There's also seasonal affective disorder, which I think is so interesting, probably because I kind of feel blue on these gray days. And that's also very linked actually to experiences of depression. So that's kind of interesting. What we also have as far as sex differences, again, that's very connected to hormone levels. And again, we do see that women are more likely to experience depression in adulthood. But we do see that men can also be vulnerable to depression. It's not to say that men aren't depressed. I definitely do not mean to say that. There's lots of depressed men, but women are just more likely to experience depression. Okay. And now, we've got this next slide. Some questions on it. So, everyone experiences minor episodes of depression. I do think this is true. I don't think this is like a huge shot to say that like people experience depression. It's a normal part of life. It's normal to feel sad, to feel blue, whether it's triggered where you don't know whether it's coming from. It's just a normal part of life. But what you can also do is you can have some antidepressant behaviors. You can safeguard yourself from feeling depression more often. And with that, that's what we call coping skills, right? And we've talked about that in class already, as far as what coping skills can look like, what self-care can look like, whether that's taking a bubble bath, whether that's making sure that you call your friends and call your family, whether you exercise, whether you eat well, whether you go to bed on time, whether sometimes you treat yourself and you sleep in late. Whatever that is for you, that could be thinking, just think of antidepressant behavior as those coping skills. So now let's think about the psychological causal factors. Okay. So big one is obviously stressful life events, when something bad happens in your life, and that's kind of also just a normal part of life. Like people unfortunately are going to die. People are going to break up with you. People are going to lose their jobs. People are going to get into car accidents. People are going to experience fights with their loved ones. Think about how many different things can upset you. And all of those can lead to some type of depression symptomatology. But of course, these deeper stressful events that we experience are going to make you more susceptible. The more extreme the event, the more likely. And with that diathesis stress model that we have talked about again, and how I said I think everyone has a little bit of stress in their lives. No one gets away scot-free. What we do, think of as far as that understanding of the model is that, again, when something, kind of difficult comes into your life, kind of stressful, you are going to be more likely to experience some type of psychological reaction to that stressful moment. What we also see is that neuroticism, or that negative affect, right? Like the neurotics, the people who are anxious, they're also more likely to just have more negative affect in general in their lives. And that can predispose them to depression as well. So that worry, that sense of impending doom that we talked about for anxiety, that can also lead people to feel pretty depressed. And if you're just thinking about, the pessimists maybe in your life, it's pretty likely that they're going to be not feeling so hot. Kind of need a tissue. Hold on one second. Sorry, I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. This is my kitchen, everyone. All right. Oh, I said that because I got a paper towel. I didn't even grab a tissue. Okay. Sorry, it's probably like real pleasant for y'all on the big screen. That says psychological causal factors. But this one we get to talk about Freud. So you have the theorists and how they all saw depression. We have Freud, the behaviorists, and the cognitive theorists. And for Freud, what he was always thinking is it's anger that's directed inwards. It's a self-hatred. It's that everyone has this anger drive, this aggressive drive. And for some people, for people who are depressed, their drive is actually towards themselves instead of towards others. And that's the way he conceptualized it. For the behaviorists, They, again, are always talking about conditioning, right? So they're talking about learned behaviors. What was it that's going on maybe in their lives that triggered them to experience depression, and that they were more predisposed, that they learned, that they were rewarded for having that sad feeling, to have those lower reactions, to feel less emotionality. And then Beck, which hopefully y'all will hear about more in this class, because he is, I would say, the foremost cognitive behavior therapist in probably the world, definitely in the United States. He's got the Beck Institute for cognitive behavioral therapy. So he took the cognitive model of depression, in that it's the negative thoughts that the people are experiencing, whether that's about themselves, whether about the world, how they're just understanding life in general, that's going to make them feel sad, low, like they have no hope. So we've got Beck's cognitive model right here. I'm going to walk you through it. So with this, according to Beck and his cognitive model, certain kinds of early experiences can lead to the formation of dysfunctional assumptions. So with, like, twisted thinking is the way that I usually use it, or say the term, but it really means dysfunctional ways of thinking. And that leads the person to be more vulnerable to depression. So twisted thinking, like an inappropriate thought or a dysfunctional assumption, could be that I am not capable of being successful, or I am not worthy of having a loved one, or no one's ever going to like me, right? All of those things are not true. Like, it's really messed up to think that about yourself, probably really sad too, and extremely unlikely, right? Like, does anyone not deserve a loved one? Is anyone so bad that they can't have any success in their lives? No. But people do have these early life experiences that can lend themselves to believing that. A lot of times it probably does come from some type of familial interaction, where a parent wasn't supportive, or they made them feel like they had to work for their love, which made them feel like they didn't deserve their love. And then you could easily see maybe how, when a child is thinking, well, I'm not good enough for my parents' love, I'm not good enough for the world, I'm never going to experience love, I'm not going to experience success in the way that I want to. So what we also know is that these depressive early experiences then lead into the formulation of these dysfunctional beliefs, which we kind of covered. And then there's what's called a critical incident. So like I mentioned, no one gets away scot-free. Everyone has some stressful experiences in their lifetime. And with that is going to kind of trigger this just activation of their belief. Like, it's like, see, I told you guys, like, this teacher gave me an F. Like, it could be as small as that. Or, I mean, maybe that's not so small. But it could be as small as, like, I got into a fender bender, I told you, right? Or it could be that someone passed away. It could be something much more serious. It could be that they lost their job. But that's going to activate this negative cycle of beliefs. And with that, you're just going to get into these what's called automatic thoughts. And with that, you're going to just constantly be thinking and reproving to yourself why that original dysfunctional thought that you had is true. And that's where you get into all those symptomatologies that we've talked about before, of how a lot of times people get themselves into these self-fulfilling prophecies that are really quite negative. So they have experiences that tell them that people don't like them. They had, like, maybe one embarrassing moment when they were in a play, or there was a bully at school that was really mean to them. And they had this thought of, no one likes me, I'm embarrassing, I can't trust myself, I'm not cool, I'm not worthy, I don't like myself. And it just kind of like builds and builds and builds onto each other, and these negative thoughts keep growing. And with that, those thoughts are going to obviously lead to really negative feelings. Like, no one's going to be feeling good about themselves when you think you can't have any friends. And that, of course, then is going to lead them to not reach out to other people. It's going to lead to other people not reaching out to them. It's going to make them feel really lonely. It's probably going to lead them to not have a lot of motivation to do anything. Like, if they feel like they're not going to be successful, why would they try? So they're probably not going to be getting out there, probably not going to be applying to new jobs, probably not going to be, getting on their bike to me and a bike crew or whatever it is. Like, they're just not going to be getting out there. So it's just going to keep fueling that depression, keep fueling those negative thoughts. And that's where you are right here in this bottom part of the cycle, where there's like this little circle that people just get stuck in. So, more on Beck's cognitive model. We have here this triangle and the little person. So with that, people have an understanding of the world through those negative automatic thoughts, which we just talked about. And there's going to be pessimistic predictions that they're going to be making that are based on three themes. And those are the three corners of the triangle. So that's going to be on the self, going to be on the future, and it's going to be on the world. And I think I kind of hit on examples of all three so far. But like the self is, I'm ugly, I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, things like that. I'm going to be I'm unsuccessful. The future related negative thoughts that are pessimistic in nature are going to be, it's hopeless, I'm never going to make friends, no one will ever like me, things will always be this way, I don't have any capacity to change in the future, nothing's ever going to get better. It's all future oriented. And then there's the world. So like, the world is out to get me, no one likes me, the world is not set up to support me, I don't fit within the world, thoughts like that. So that is how you can start breaking down some of those thoughts, that people can start maybe understanding just categories of their pessimistic thoughts. So then hopefully you can start addressing them. And we have worksheets. CBT, cognitive behavioral, B, that was B. Therapy is all about the worksheets. Just is. So here we have a thought worksheet, which really is, again, like the tenet of CBT treatment. And what you have is like these different columns that you ask your clients, or you can just do on your own, because it's really just a helpful activity that could be supportive to you. So you have the situation, so what happened, what was the impetus for what was going on, what you were feeling. The next one is, what were you feeling? What was your then automatic thought of like, I feel sad, or I feel rejected. Automatic thought is, I don't like anyone and no one likes me. Cognitive distortion. There's a list of cognitive distortions that I don't think I have on these slides. I apologize. But it's just a way of categorizing why that thought that you just had is messed up. That's what a cognitive distortion is. It's a way of categorizing the negative automatic thought that you just had in a clear, concise way that you can identify what type, I guess, of negative thought it is. So that cognitive distortion is that it's all or nothing thinking, never ever thinking, never say never. So there's a list of those that you can identify, and that also just helps people to understand why that thinking's messed up, why it's so illogical to think that way. And then you always need to respond. Respond to your automatic thoughts. And that is actually going back to this slide right here, how you get out of that cycle, right? Like, if you are never responding to those negative thoughts that you're constantly having about yourself, of negativity, of everything's bad, nothing's going to happen that's better, no one's ever going to like you. If you don't ever stop and say, wait a minute, there was that one nice person who smiled at me at the grocery store, or there was that one time I got an A in the class, Or there was that one time that my boss said, I did a great job on that. Like if you're never responding with proofs about how that negative thought is not true, you're going to get stuck in that cycle. So, got to help your clients see that. And then just on this worksheet, there's lots of different kinds of variations to this, but it all kind of comes down to these kinds of basic ideas. Is what was the outcome? What actually happened? Was it as bad as you thought it would be? Probably not. How are we doing with time? Okay, so next slide. Learned helplessness and control. So learned helplessness, I hope you have heard of in your other classes, and that is the idea that people have learned throughout their lifetime that they can't do things on their own. That's a basic way of understanding it. That it is a response that they have because they don't have trust in themselves to complete a task, to make new friends, to be successful, whatever positive things are in life. And they don't believe that they can do it on their own. A lot of times this comes out of childhood for parents who are just constantly hovering over their children and swooping in to save them or just want to do stuff for them. And that kind of breeds learned helplessness. And with learned helplessness, it has a feeling that you don't have a lot of control in the world around you. In that when you feel like you have a very low locus of control, you see LOC right here, or external locus of control, that the world around you controls things, but you don't internally control your world. Like you don't have a lot of assertiveness, you don't have a lot of motivation, you don't have a lot of agency, is a good word, I think. Then you have a low locus of control, or you have a high external sense of control, and that you don't have that internal sense of control. Again, that very much is connected to that idea of learned helplessness. And with that, if you don't feel like you can change, right, that future-oriented, that part of the triangle. It's kind of funny when you're watching yourself. When your future orientation is saying things are not going to work out for you, why try? You're not going to, and things are not going to go well for you, right? If you don't even try, if you don't even make an effort, it's not going to go very well. So that's the idea of learned helplessness and how that can contribute to people's depressive symptomatologies. So more on those causal factors. We're on slide 26 for those who maybe need to catch up. Or, I don't know, if you're watching this again, scroll back. Okay, you get organized. So we have here this idea of helplessness and hopelessness. We have here helplessness. I hope I'm saying it clearly and that you can see it. Helplessness, hopelessness. And with that, there's this theory of understanding that people feel like they don't have a lot of agency, that they can't help themselves, that they're going to be very pessimistic in their attributions and their understandings of the world, and that things are going to be not good for them, things are not going to work out in their favor. So they're going to feel like it's hopeless, right? We've got hopelessness theory right here. It's proposing that these pessimistic attributions that they're making and their understanding of negative life events are going to be producing depression. And that this idea of hopelessness, of the lack of ability to change, is going to bring about a sense of depression, because you're going to be like, why should I do anything? Why should I feel happy? Nothing's ever going to change. Nothing's ever going to be better. And then there's this idea of rumination on that. Rumination is where you're just constantly thinking the same thought over and over and over again, thinking about it. It's constantly going around in your head. So just over half of the patients who receive a diagnosis of a mood disorder also receive an anxiety disorder. And that's very much connected to this idea of rumination, of constantly thinking these negative thoughts that are going to lead one into the other. Again, they probably are related to feelings of worthlessness, low feelings of self-esteem, feeling hopeless, feeling helpless, feeling like they can't change anything, it's never going to get better, no one likes them, and they all just kind of loop around, and then it gets people stuck. And it gets them stuck for so long that they're going to be experiencing depression for some significant amount of time. Okay, so more on causal factors. Now we're on page 27. And I'm going to take a break before we get into bipolar disorders. Okay, so just on this last one, and then I'll stop this stream. But, you can start up the next one as soon as you want to. Okay, so depression has significant interpersonal correlates. This also can be thought of as an interpersonal theory for the understanding and conceptualization of depression. And what we see is that people who experience depression most often have a severe lack of social support, a severe lack of community, and also a lot of lack of social skills and a lot of lack of connection. And with that can be very depressing, in that they're going to feel lonely, that they feel alone in their world, that they don't feel that anyone can empathize with them, that they feel like no one understands them. And that often is just a really sad, low pace for someone to be in. What this also can lead into is a sense of hostility and rejection from other people. So they either are experiencing rejection from others, which is likely if they're not reaching out to other people, if they're feeling really low about themselves. And what we also then see is sometimes that's reversed, is that like, I'm going to reject someone before they have a chance to reject me because I know they're going to reject me. And that's like, regardless of the fact, like maybe they weren't going to be rejected by that other person, but they might have been. And they might not have been. So with that, you just see kind of like, again, a loop of like rejection. And a lot of times it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy. And then finally, also, we do see that depression and marital dissatisfaction are highly correlated. And I mean, maybe you have experienced this, had a friend, had a loved one who's experienced depression. It's really hard to be in a relationship with them because number one, they have that low affect that we just talked about. And with that, it kind of breaks down that connection and that emotionality that you want to feel in close, intimate partnerships like marriages. And then also it can be that the partner is no longer as supportive and doesn't want to feel as close just because it's so hard to sit with someone in their sadness. Okay, so I'm going to take a break, and then we'll pick it up with bipolar related disorders.